The air in the Roosevelt National Forest does not just sit around you. It watches. It is a heavy, ancient weight that settles into your lungs, smelling of crushed pine needles and the damp, cold breath of the Poudre River. Up here, in the high country of Colorado, the beauty is a jagged lie designed to distract you from the fact that you are standing in a graveyard. This is where the missing 411 phenomena begins to feel less like a statistic and more like a predator. On the 2nd of October, 1999, the sky was a deceptive shade of blue that promised safety. A group of hikers, friends bound by faith and fellowship, set out on the Big South Trail. They thought they were walking into the cathedral of nature for a day of reflection and peace. They did not realize they were walking into a blind spot in reality, a place where the rules of physics and mercy do not seem to apply. Jaryd Atadero was only 3 years old, a burst of energy in a small frame, unaware that the shadows between the trees were reaching for him. He was at that age where the world is a series of wonders to be chased. Every rock, a mountain, and every stream, an ocean. He ran ahead of the adults, his small feet pounding against the dirt and stone of the trail with a rhythmic, innocent thud. It was a familiar scene for any parent. A child testing his independence while still remaining within the safety net of voices and laughter. But the safety net in these mountains is made of smoke and mirrors. One moment, Jaryd was there, a bright spot of color moving through the green and brown of the forest like a flickering flame. The next moment, he rounded a bend in the trail, and the world simply closed behind him with the finality of a tomb. There was no scream, no sound of a struggle, no frantic rustle of brush to indicate a mountain lion or a bear. Just a sudden, absolute silence that felt heavier than the mountain itself. The hikers called out his name, their voices initially light with the expectation of a quick response. They expected to hear a giggle or the sound of small boots running back toward them over the dry leaves. But as the minutes ticked by, the lightness vanished, replaced by a cold, leaden dread in the pits of their stomachs. The forest did not echo their calls. It seemed to swallow them whole, leaving nothing but the rushing, indifferent sound of the river. They searched the immediate area with a frantic, desperate energy that only comes when you realize the unthinkable has happened. They checked the riverbanks, their eyes scanning the churning, white water for any sign of a small, colorful jacket. They checked the thickets of willow and the dark spaces under the fallen logs where a child might hide. Every shadow began to look like a crouching figure. Every snap of a twig sounded like a footstep that wasn't there. By the time the sun began to dip behind the jagged peaks, casting long, skeletal shadows across the trail, the realization had set in. Jaryd was truly gone. The authorities were notified, and the full weight of a mountain search and rescue operation began to mobilize under the darkening sky. This was not just a few volunteers with flashlights and hope. This was a massive, coordinated effort involving helicopters, thermal imaging, and some of the best tracking dogs in the country. The searchers moved through the terrain like an army of ghosts, scouring every square inch of the Big South Trail. They moved through the dense brush and over the granite outcrops, pushing themselves to the point of physical collapse. But the mountain remained stubbornly silent, a wall of rock and wood that offered no clues. It was as if the earth had opened up and pulled the boy into a void, leaving no scent for the hounds to find. And that was the first anomaly that started to haunt the investigators and the family. The bloodhounds, animals trained to find a scent in the most difficult conditions, could not pick up a single trace of Jaryd. They would sniff the air, circle in confusion, and then sit down, refusing to move forward as if they had hit an invisible wall. In the world of the missing 411, this is a recurring nightmare. The dogs simply stop working as if the trail ends in midair. The weather, which had been so clear and welcoming only hours before, suddenly turned vicious and cold. A front moved in, bringing with it a biting wind that howled through the canyons and a dusting of snow that covered the ground. This is another hallmark of these strange disappearances. The sudden, localized shift in weather that seems to erase any evidence. It felt as though the mountain was actively trying to hide what had happened, burying the truth under a layer of ice. Jaryd Atadero, Jaryd's father, was forced to stand by and watch as the search for his son slowly ground to a halt. The cynical part of the human mind wants to find a logical explanation. A predator, or a fall into the freezing river. But there were no tracks of a mountain lion. No drag marks. And the river had been searched repeatedly by divers without success. The boy had not just wandered off. He had been erased from the map. For 4 long years. The case sat cold. A festering wound in the hearts of those who knew the boy and those who searched for him. The search and rescue teams moved on to other missions. And the hikers returned to their lives, though they likely never walked into the woods the same way again. The Big South Trail remained. A beautiful and lonely stretch of wilderness that held its secrets with a tight, stony grip. Alan never stopped looking. But the hope of a living rescue had long since withered into a hope for some kind of finality. Then came June of 2003. A day that would bring answers that were more disturbing than the questions themselves. 2 hikers were exploring a rugged, steep slope far above the main trail, in an area that was considered nearly inaccessible for an adult. They were 550 feet up a vertical incline, surrounded by jagged rocks and dense, thorny brush. It was a place where you had to use your hands to climb. A place where a 3-year-old should never have been able to reach. There, among the grey granite and the dry, mountain, earth, they found a single white sneaker. It sat there, strangely pristine, as if it had been placed on the rock rather than dropped in a struggle. Nearby, they found a second shoe and a pair of trousers that had been worn by the boy on that fateful day. The most chilling detail was that the clothing was turned inside out. A detail that appears with sickening frequency in these types of cases. The searchers returned to that high, lonely spot and found a single tooth and a small fragment of a skull. That was all that remained of the vibrant boy who had run ahead of his group 4 years prior. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood on the clothing, and no evidence that a predator had dragged him up there. A mountain lion would have left the bones scattered and chewed, and it certainly would not have neatly removed a child's clothing before consuming him. The location itself defied every law of physics and biology that we understand. To get to that spot, Jaryd would have had to cross a roaring river, climb a nearly vertical cliff, and navigate through dense brush. He was 3 years old. His legs were barely 12 inches long, and his physical stamina was that of a toddler. The physical effort required to reach that height would have exhausted a grown man in peak condition. Some people talk about mountain lions, claiming they are the silent killers of the high woods. But mountain lions are messy predators, and they do not have the manual dexterity to undress their prey or turn trousers inside out. Others speak of something far more unsettling. A predator that mimics the environment itself. Something that can move silently through the trees and pluck a child from the trail as if he were nothing more than a piece of fallen fruit. The theory of high-altitude displacement is one that haunts the fringes of the missing 411 research. It suggests that victims are taken by something and moved to locations that are physically impossible for them to reach. They are often found in areas that have been searched multiple times before, appearing as if they were dropped from the heavens. It is a thought that chills the marrow. The idea that something is watching from above, waiting for that split second of isolation. In the case of Jaryd, the mystery only deepened with the discovery of his meager remains. Why were his clothes inside out? As if they had been peeled off him by something that didn't understand how human garments work. Why was his tooth found in such a specific, isolated spot, far from any other skeletal remains? The forest does not give up its secrets easily, and when it does, it usually provides more horror than comfort to those left behind. We like to think we are at the top of the food chain, protected by our technology and our numbers. But in places like the Roosevelt National Forest, we are just guests who have overstayed our welcome. There is a sense of a predatory intelligence at work in these woods. Something that understands our patterns and knows exactly when to strike. It knows that we trust our eyes and our ears, and it knows exactly how to deceive them with the sounds of the wind. It is a presence that feels old, cold, and entirely indifferent to human suffering or the passage of time. It does not kill for hunger alone. It seems to collect, to displace, and to leave behind puzzles that can never be solved by modern science. Jaryd Atadero is just one name on a long and growing list of those who have vanished into the green silence of our national parks. His story is a warning to anyone who thinks that a marked trail is a guarantee of safety. The woods are not a park. They are a wilderness. And the wilderness has its own set of rules that we have forgotten. When you step off the pavement and into the shadows of the pines, you are entering a realm where you are no longer the master. This case bears a striking and uncomfortable resemblance to the disappearance of young Dior Kuntz Jr. in the mountains of Idaho. Just like Jaryd, Dior vanished in a mere heartbeat while his family was only feet away, leaving behind not a single footprint. Both cases involve a sudden, impossible silence and a landscape that seemed to swallow a child whole without leaving a trace. The mountain still stands there, looking down on the Big South Trail with its stony, unblinking eyes of granite. The Poudre River still rushes over the rocks, its roar masking the sounds of anything that might be moving in the deep brush. And somewhere, in the dark spaces between the trees, the thing that took Jaryd Atadero might still be waiting. It is patient. It has all the time in the world. And it is always hungry for the next person who dares to wander. The next time you find yourself on a lonely trail, and the birds suddenly stop singing their songs, do not look back. Do not stop to wonder why the air has suddenly grown cold, or why the shadows seem to be stretching toward your feet. Just keep moving, and pray that you are not the one the forest has decided to keep for its own. Because once the silence takes you, there is no coming back from the dark places. The story of the boy on the mountain is a testament to the fact that there are things in this world we are not meant to understand. We can map the stars and split the atom, but we cannot explain how a 3-year-old ends up on a cliffside. We are left with the shoes, the tooth, and the cold. A hard realization that we are never truly alone in the deep woods. Missing 411 is not just a collection of stories. It is a map of the places where the veil is thin and the light fails. It is a reminder that the world is much larger and much stranger than we like to admit to ourselves. And as long as people continue to walk into the trees, the list of the missing will continue to grow. The forest is waiting, and it never forgets a face that it has marked for the harvest. The silence is the loudest thing in the mountains once you realize what it represents. It is the sound of a life being snuffed out. Not by a struggle, but by a displacement of reality itself. We look for tracks, for blood, for signs of the struggle we expect from the natural world. But what do you do when the signs point to something unnatural? What do you do when the evidence suggests that the boy was not carried by a beast, but moved by the mountain? Jaryd Atadero spent years looking for his son, and what he found was a nightmare dressed in a child's clothing. He found the evidence of an impossible journey and the remains of a life that was taken in the blink of an eye. The grief of a parent is a heavy thing, but the grief of a parent with no answers is a weight that can crush the soul. He is a man who has looked into the abyss, and the abyss did not just look back. It smiled. The Roosevelt National Forest continues to draw thousands of hikers every year, each one believing they are safe. They walk the same trail Jaryd walked, breathing the same pine-scented air and listening to the same river. They do not see the eyes in the shadows or the patterns in the stone that suggest a predatory design. They do not feel the shift in the air that precedes a vanishing. They are the blind leading the blind through a landscape of teeth. We owe it to the missing to remember their stories, not as campfire tales, but as warnings of the world's true nature. Jaryd Atadero, Dior Kuntz, and the hundreds of others who have vanished without a trace are the cost of our curiosity. They are the reminders that the wild places are still wild, and that some things are better left unexplored. The next time you see a bend in the trail, remember the boy who turned it and never came back. The sneakers found on that ledge were not just footwear. They were monuments to a mystery that has no end. They stood as proof that something happened on that mountain that defies our understanding of life and death. The forest kept those shoes for 4 years, preserving them in a way that felt deliberate, as if it were taunting those who searched. It was a display of power, a sign that the mountain can take what it wants and return it when it pleases. So, walk carefully when you venture into the high country, and never let your guard down for even a second. The silence is not peace. It is a predator's breath held in anticipation. The trees are not just wood and leaf. They are the bars of a cage that can close around you at any time. And the mountain is not just a landmark. It is an ancient entity that has been watching us since the dawn of time. It knows your name. It knows your scent. And it is always waiting.